The Basement Tenant, a novel, written by L.Z. Sinclaire, narrated by L.Z. Sinclaire. She researched the house that afternoon. This, at least, was a thing she knew how to do. The journalist's reflex, when the emotional terrain becomes unnavigable, go to the records, pull the documents, build the timeline. Facts are the guardrails that keep you from driving off the cliff of your own uncertainty. The Cook County Recorder of Deeds had the brownstone's ownership history digitized back to 1978. Before that, she'd need to visit the office in person, but the digital record was enough to start. 2019 to present, Caroline Whitfield Weaver, acquired in the divorce settlement. 2007 to 2019, Carrie Whitfield Weaver and Derek A. Weaver, purchased for $1.8 million. 1994 to 2007, Harold R. Loomis, purchased for $420,000. 1978 to 1994, Robert and Sylvia Marchetti. Harold Loomis. She'd never met him. The house had been sold through an estate. Loomis had died in 2007, and the property had sat vacant for several months before Derek, who had an instinct for undervalued real estate the way sharks had an instinct for blood, found it and talked Carrie into their first major purchase together. A forever home, he'd called it, standing in the empty front parlor, his hand on the small of her back. And she'd believed him because he was Derek, and Derek was the kind of man whose certainty was contagious. She searched Harold Loomis. The obituary was brief. Harold R. Loomis, 71, died at home. Cardiac arrest. No surviving family. A life reduced to 4 sentences in the Tribune, which Carrie understood now had a particular cruelty. She'd written obituaries earlier in her career and had always thought of them as small kindnesses, not realizing until now that an obituary with no survivors was just a record of a person no one was left to miss. But the obituary said 2007. The county record said 2007. The house had been sold through the estate. She searched further. The estate was handled by a law firm, Gilman and Associates. She didn't recognize the name. The estate's executor was listed as a bank, First Midwest Trust, which meant Loomis had no one to leave it to and had designated an institution to clean up after him. The sale to Derek and Carrie had been brokered by a commercial real estate agent Carrie had never met. Derek had handled the entire transaction. She searched the renovation records. After they'd purchased the house, Derek had hired a contractor to redo the basement. It had been unfinished, he said, and they'd wanted a guest suite. The contractor was Apex Building Solutions, a firm in Bridgeport. Carrie searched Apex Building Solutions. It took 4 clicks. Apex Building Solutions was a subsidiary of Lakefront Property Services, which was a subsidiary of Lakefront Redevelopment Partners, which was, she pulled up the Illinois Secretary of State's corporate filings, registered with a managing member listed as Weaver Development Group. Derek's company. Derek had hired his own company to renovate the basement of the house they'd bought together. This was not in itself unusual. Derek was in real estate. He had connections. He would naturally use his own network for a renovation. But the corporate nesting, Apex Inside Lakefront Property Services, Inside Lakefront Redevelopment Partners, was the kind of structure you built not for efficiency, but for opacity. You layered LLCs like that when you wanted to make a transaction hard to trace. Carrie had written about this exact technique in a 2016 story about shell companies buying residential property in Chicago. She sat back from her laptop. The kitchen was quiet. The house was quiet. But the quiet had changed. It was no longer the absence of sound, but the presence of something she hadn't been listening for. She went downstairs to the basement door. She unlatched it. She opened it. The stairs descended into Elias's apartment. She could see the bottom, the edge of the rug he'd placed on the concrete floor, the corner of his bed visible through the open bedroom doorway. The apartment was neat, spare, almost monastic. No personal items visible from this angle. No photographs, no books, no evidence of a life beyond the immediate. She didn't go down. She just looked. Then she closed the door, relatched it, and called the police. The officer was young, white, polite in the way that young white officers in Lincoln Park were polite, deferential, careful, aware that the people on this block had the alderman's cell phone number and the inclination to use it. "You said you've been hearing voices, ma'am."
Ma'am. The word that meant he'd already categorized her. "I've been hearing a woman's voice in my basement unit. My tenant lives alone. He's a man. The voice is female, and it's present at night, sometimes when he's not home." The officer wrote this down. His partner, also young, also polite, stood by the front door with his hands clasped, scanning the hallway with the practiced non-curiosity of someone who'd been trained to observe without appearing to judge. "And this has been going on for how long?" "About 2 weeks." "Have you spoken to your tenant about it?" "No." "Any reason?" "Because I don't trust myself to know if what I'm hearing is real. Because my ex-husband has filed papers claiming I'm unstable and every action I take is a potential exhibit. Because the last time I stood at that door, someone walked toward me from the other side, and the silence that followed was worse than the sound." "I thought it'd be better to have it checked by someone official," she said. The officer nodded. "We'll take a look. Is your tenant home?" "He should be. He sleeps during the day." They went down. Carrie stayed in the kitchen. She heard the knock, 3 firm raps on the interior basement door, and then Elias's voice, groggy but composed, and the officer's voice, professional, explaining the situation in the neutral language of someone filling out a form. She heard them walking through the unit, the officer's boots on the concrete, Elias's bare feet or socked feet, she couldn't tell, but the sound was softer, lighter, as if even his footsteps were deliberate. They came back up after 12 minutes. The officer's face was neutral, which was its own verdict. "Everything looks fine down there, ma'am. Your tenant was very cooperative. The unit's clean, no signs of anyone else living there. He said he sometimes falls asleep with a podcast on. That might be what you're hearing." "It's not a podcast." The officer's expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough, a millimeter of something that might have been patience or might have been the first whisper of doubt. "Sound can be tricky in old buildings. These brownstones, the pipes, the ductwork, it can carry sound from neighboring units. I know what a neighboring unit sounds like. I've lived here for 17 years. "I understand. If it happens again, you can certainly call us, but as of right now, there's nothing for us to act on." He gave her a card. She took it. They left. She stood in the kitchen. Through the floor, she could hear Elias moving, resettling, returning to bed, the creak of the frame as he lay down. The officer had seen nothing. The officer had heard nothing. The officer had left satisfied, and Elias had been cooperative, and the word cooperative lodged in Carrie's mind like a splinter because she'd used that word herself in stories to describe people who had something to hide and understood that the best way to hide it was to open every door and let the searcher conclude there was nothing to find. She went to the basement door. She didn't open it. She ran her hand along the frame, down to the bottom hinge, across the door jamb. And there, on the inside edge of the closet door, the small closet set into the wall beside the basement stairs, the one she used for brooms and cleaning supplies, she found it. A scratch, long, vertical, running from about 4 feet up to about 5 feet. Recent, the wood was pale where it had been scored, unvarnished, raw. It was the kind of mark a fingernail made when dragged downward against wood, not casually, not accidentally, with pressure, with urgency, at nail height. Carrie stared at it. She touched it with the tip of her finger. The groove was shallow but definite, the wood fibers torn in a direction that indicated a downward stroke, someone pulling their hand down the door, or being pulled, or reaching. She took a photo. Then she closed the closet, washed her hands, and sat at the kitchen table in the silence of her house and felt the specific vertiginous sensation of knowing that something was wrong and having no one who would believe her. At Linden Academy, the machinery continued its work. Carrie arrived at pickup on Thursday to find Miles waiting outside the front doors instead of the usual classroom release point. He was sitting on the limestone steps with his backpack, alone, watching the other children stream past in their navy blazers toward the gleaming SUVs and Teslas that lined Wabash. "Hey, Bug, why are you out here?"
Miss Patterson said I could wait outside today. Why? Miles looked at his shoes. New Nikes. Derek had bought them. They were $180, and Miles loved them, and Carrie hated that she noticed the price, hated that the price was a message from Derek. I can provide what you can't. Jackson had a birthday party in the classroom. His mom brought cupcakes. Were you invited? I was in the room, but Jackson said the cupcakes were for his party, and his party was only for people on the list, and I wasn't on the list. Carrie felt something hot and precise move through her chest. Not anger exactly, but the mother's version of it, which was anger alloyed with helplessness, tempered by the knowledge that the world was going to hurt your child and you could not stop it. You could only stand nearby and watch and try to keep your face steady. Did you talk to Miss Patterson? She gave me one from the extra ones, but it wasn't the same. No, it wasn't the same. The extra cupcake from the teacher was not the same as the cupcake from the list. Miles understood this distinction at 8 the way Carrie understood it at 37. The difference between being included and being accommodated, between belonging and being allowed to stay. Jackson Aldridge is a little jerk, Carrie said, and Miles laughed, a real laugh startled out of him, and for a moment the weight lifted. But in the car, after the laugh faded, Miles asked something else, quietly looking out the window at the brownstone sliding past on Belden, the kind of question a child asks when he's been saving it. "Mom, am I black?" She gripped the wheel. "You're biracial, sweetheart. Dad is black and I'm white. You're both." Jackson said I'm not really black because I live with my white mom, and Tyler said I'm not really white because of my hair. He touched his hair, the tight curls that Carrie loved and did not fully know how to care for, that she learned to manage through YouTube tutorials and a black hair salon in Hyde Park that Derek's mother had recommended once in a rare act of generosity that had felt, even then, like a test.
"People who tell you what you are don't get to decide what you are," Carrie said. And she believed it, and she also knew in the part of herself that the divorce had scraped clean of pretense, that she was the wrong person to deliver this particular truth, that Miles needed to hear it from someone who'd lived inside the question, not someone who'd married into it. She thought of Elias, in the hallway, crouching down to Miles's level, the ease of it, the instinctive understanding. She pushed the thought away. She was not going to use a man she barely knew as a surrogate for the racial education she didn't know how to provide. She was not going to be that kind of white woman. She was not. But the thought stayed. In the car, she texted Vanessa. Miles wasn't on the birthday party list. Vanessa responded 40 minutes later. "Oh no, the invitations went through the class list. I'm sure it was just an oversight. These things get so hectic. Let's do a play date soon." Yellow heart emoji. The exclamation points, the word oversight, which was the Lincoln Park word for deliberate exclusion, because in this world, nothing was an accident. The birthday list was curated the way the gala seating chart was curated, the way the group text was curated, with surgical precision and plausible deniability. Miles wouldn't get a play date. The text was a performance of regret, not regret itself. Carrie knew this. She also knew that knowing it changed nothing because the power of the system was that it operated entirely through gestures that could not be challenged without appearing unhinged. If she confronted Vanessa, she would be the difficult mother. If she went to the school, she would be the unstable parent. If she said nothing, Miles would continue to eat the extra cupcake and learn slowly, permanently, that his place in this world was conditional on the goodwill of people who had no goodwill to spare. She drove home. She made Miles a snack. She helped him with homework. She put him to bed. Then she sat at the kitchen table and listened to the house. And at 2:14 a.m., the voice came again. Low, female, steady, and Carrie closed her eyes and pressed her palms flat against the table and thought, "There is a woman in my basement and no one will believe me. And there is a system around my son and no one will stop it. And I am sitting in the middle of a 4-story house in the best neighborhood in Chicago, and I have never been more powerless in my life." The end. You have been listening to The Basement Tenant, written by L.V. Sinclaire, narrated by L.V. Sinclaire. Thank you for listening.